YouTube, what is good? It's your man Ribs from Doing Film Things. So I'm continuing to do some printing here with the Intrepid Enlarger, and basically I did a color print and a black and white print recently because I wanted to test out the contrast controls here and also just keep messing around with the color controls as well to see how that experience was like. So before I tell you any more opinions, let's go ahead and jump into some of that footage. Yo, what's going on? So we're in the bathroom. I've set up the enlarger. I had to kind of mess around because I'm going for a big print today, 10 by 12, which is a bit bigger than I usually do, which is 8 by 10. And the 10 by 12 on this particular enlarger requires a bit more height. And then that means I have to kind of spread out the legs and tilt it a bit more. You know, again, kind of messing around with the tripod, which I already explained to you that in the previous video, that gets a bit challenging with this enlarger, depending on how much space you have. But I'm doing it on the floor, which means I have plenty of surface area to get it done. But I still have to kind of mess around and, you know, tilt this in kind of a strange way. But it looks secure. I don't think it's gonna fall. So I got my chemicals warming up right now. I got some leftover chemicals from my last print session last week. I'm curious if the developer is gonna work. The fixer always works, but the developer, you know, we'll see if it's still good, especially because I'm using those bottles that aren't ideal. But yeah, I'm gonna give that a go, do a quick test run, and then we should be able to get started. Alright y'all, so I just switched up my whole setup to do color printing now. I'm gonna do another 10 by 12 and I've got my RA4 chemicals warming up and I've got my tank and my little pouring cups and all of that, so should be good to go. In terms of the enlarger itself, went on the controller and I switched it to the color mode, which basically reveals the magenta wheels, the yellow and cyan, and that lets you control color. So I'm gonna go ahead and mess around with that. And I'm gonna start out with 0 cyan, 50 magenta, 50 yellow as my baseline. Do a couple test exposures, and then from there I'll kind of start messing around with the color, try to get it more magenta, more yellow, less yellow, that kind of thing. So let's go. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. Here are actually the prints so we can take a closer look and kind of talk through them. These are the two black and white prints, and these are both from 35mm negative. So there's gonna be a lot of additional grain that you're gonna notice, especially with Kodak XX. Making a XX video kind of review soon, so make sure to look out for that in the next week or two. But in the meantime, we can kind of talk about these prints. And it's very evident in this one, for example. If you look at the face of the subject, there's a lot of really specific kind of dotty grain in there that's very noticeable. It's not smooth per se, but it's not extremely harsh. Either way, you know, you blow up 35mm negatives and you're gonna get some more of that character, given that the characteristics of the film are gonna be that much more obvious with a bigger enlargement. And then with the color print that I made, this is actually Portrait 800, and it's, I believe I pushed this one stop as well, so shot at 1600 and then push developed. And you can definitely see the grain here as well. Portrait 800 obviously is grainy on its own, but you know, you push it one stop and it becomes a bit more apparent. But I love the colors though. I think that's why I picked this shot, because there's just so much color and you see this kind of matching kind of theme between her purse and then the glowing colors in here. It's funny, this is one of those images where the scan I actually like a lot more than the print. And I think in the scan I was able to kind of manipulate the contrast a bit more, added a vignette, Didn't add a vignette here, but I could have. But either way, you know, it's just sometimes I love the print more, sometimes I love the scan more. It all really depends on the specific shot. So I want to talk about a couple of specific things about the Intrepid Enlarger. A bunch of people have been asking me about the film holders, and these are the film holders right here. As I mentioned, I've got 35, 645, 66, and 67. And they just announced they're doing a 6.9 as well, so that should be all good. With my specific enlarger and the LED light that's in there, the larger negatives don't come out that well because this LED light's not performing properly. It doesn't fill kind of even light around the entire size of the negative. And that's specific to this prototype. Remember, this is a prototype, and the final product that'll be taken care of. With these prints that I just showed you, these are all 35, so the problem's kind of irrelevant. There was no vignetting or anything on the prints. It came out perfectly, no matter how big or small you made your print. And these holders, they do exactly kind of what they're supposed to do. It's just kind of two hard pieces of, I don't know, maybe this is some sort of composite-y, plastic-y, metal thing. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. But either way, you sandwich the film in between the two, and then the pressure from the gap here on the enlarger when you shove it in, that'll keep this closed. My only kind of feedback for this is, you know, you have this film right here, and let's say your strip is like this. If you're using the middle shot on the strip of film, you're gonna have some sag on this side and on this side. And because you have to slide this in, kind of like this, sometimes that film on the inside, once it gets in there, it'll just start to curl and get caught. You won't be able to put it in all the way. It hasn't been a massive problem because I've been kind of lucky that the prints that I've been doing, the images have been kind of to the farther end of the strip. But if it's in the middle, it kind of becomes a bit challenging. They do offset the mask here so that you have a side that has a lot more metal, and therefore you should be able to finagle it depending on which particular shot you're taking on here. This strip is much longer than 6 images, so I guess this is not a good example, but I've had to kind of deal with that a couple times here and there, and you know, something to look out for. It's less of a problem with the bigger negatives because for those, the strip's probably going to be a bit shorter, given that you typically cut those less in order to fit in the negative holder. But anyways, that's kind of it. This is the prototype version, so it's held together by a strip of tape, which, you know, if I was buying this for real, I'd be kind of put off by this. But again, this is a prototype. I'm not sure what the plans are for the actual production model, but I'm sure there's going to be something a bit different here to give this more of a durable finish for the long term. The last thing I want to talk about is on the controller. So I told you I did some black and white prints, and this particular knob right here you see with the gray color, this is to control contrast, and it goes all the way from 00 all the way to 5. And I thought this was extremely handy. I've used contrast controls on other enlargers in the past, and it's just great to have it right here. This is the kind of contrast control where you don't have to adjust the exposure time. The more contrast you add, it doesn't mean that you have to add more time to compensate for that. With some older enlargers, that is the case. I don't know what the proper term is. Someone can correct me in the comments, but the point is here, very simple, you can turn the contrast knob and you know what you're doing. Other than that, I printed color, like I mentioned and you saw in the previous clip, and I've started to run into those issues again with the buttons all being the same size. I'm getting used to where the buttons are, but again, in the pitch dark, especially if you're focusing on your baseboard where your paper is and you're dodging and burning or something, it's gonna be hard to press these buttons while you're doing stuff because they all look the same. They're the same size, and you kind of have to orient yourself before pressing anything here. You kind of have to like feel around and say, okay, first, second, third button. With my timer control, the kind of the old school one, there's only one button, so you just kind of smack on it, does its thing, and it's all good. Last thing is, on this prototype version, there's this button, this gray one right here. This is for your focusing light, which basically gives you the brightest illumination possible, and it just stays on. Here it stays on for 25 seconds, which you would think is enough time, but that's not enough time. With my classic enlarger timer, you flick up the button and that turns on the focusing light and it stays on the entire time until you flick it down. With this one, it's 25 seconds and it automatically turns off. And that's quite annoying because sometimes, you know, you're in there focusing your image and you're turning the knobs and you're trying to get this perfectly focused. And then midway through doing that, it just goes completely dark. And you're like, what's going on? And then you realize, oh, the timer stopped. And that just kept happening over and over and over again. I'm sure they can program that differently, so that's just feedback I'm gonna pass on to them. They could probably make it to turn on forever. You know, it's just kind of programming. So I'm hoping that gets changed as well for the production unit. But overall, good experience. I still don't have a copy stand like I mentioned in my previous videos, which you should watch all up in these links right here. And you know, that's a bit challenging for me because I have to put it on the floor and then there's the tripod, and it's extremely annoying for me personally. If I had a copy stand, it'd be a completely different story. So I still vouch for the fact that you should use a copy stand with this, unless you have a cool tripod that has like a hanging arm or that has a column that you can invert or something. Mine doesn't have any of that, and that's why it's challenging for me. All right, y'all, comment below if you have any questions about the Enlarger. I can kind of give you my quick feedback. And let me know what you think of the prints as well. I really like the black and white ones, as I showed you already. They have massive light leaks in them, and I still really like it. I actually think it adds a nice character that obviously wouldn't have been there if this image didn't have a light leak. So I'm really happy with it overall. And of course, black and white, I think anything kind of stylistic and creative on black and white makes it look cooler. Whereas if this was a color image, I feel like I'd be more upset about the light leak. But either way, I'm enjoying that. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And of course, if you haven't listened to my podcast yet, links are down below. I got a bunch of cool episodes there right now. And of course, we got some more good ones coming up as well. All right, y'all, to the next video. Peace.